guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Callie, and today I'm going to be going through my top 15 books from 2021. I have compiled the list. I had a ton of 5-star reads within 2021, but these 15 really stood out to me as just books that I still can't stop thinking about, and that's really it. Just books that have stuck in my head occasionally, just randomly. It'll pop into my head because it was something about it was so good. So I'm going to go through these in, I guess, the order that I read them. I tried narrowing it down to like one book a month, but there was a couple of months where I read just so many really good books, so I had to expand the list from 12 to 15. So the book that I picked for January was Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Maniscalco. I know this is a very polarizing story, but I fell in love with it. We're following this girl who's trying to investigate the mystery of the murder of her twin sister. And through that, she accidentally summons the demon Wrath. And there's all these personifications of the 7 deadly sins. We really only explore 2 or 3 within this book, and I just got my copy of Kingdom of the Cursed, which matches this beautiful edition. So I'm really excited to dive back into the world, and we have also been told the title for the 3rd book. And I don't know if this is going to be a trilogy or quartet, because Kerri Maniscalco's last book series was a quartet. So I don't know if she's keeping up with that pattern. I could read Wrath all day long. I loved the way he was written. I love Amelia. While she was a little bit on the annoying side in the beginning, she just became such a dynamic and independent character, and I fell in love with her, and I can't wait to see more of her growth in the next books. February is one of the months I have 2. The first book being A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. This is book 4-5 in the ACOTAR series, and I've been waiting patiently for this book to come out. So naturally, literally the day it came out, I drove my happy butt in a snowstorm to the Barnes & Noble, because the 2 copies I had ordered, I don't think I received either of those copies until like April, and there was no way I was waiting until April. I read this book in 2 days. I'm actually currently re-listening to this book right now. I forgot so many little things that happen within this book. We're following Feyre's sister Nesta on this journey of healing. She went through so many traumatic things, and what I really like about what Sarah J. Maas did with Nesta is throughout the rest of the series, I hated Nesta. She was an awful person, an awful sister, just an overall despicable human being. In this, she doesn't necessarily get rid or justify those behaviors, but instead, when we're following Nesta, she's trying to heal. And the way Nesta heals is through lashing out. And we see that as a common thread throughout her entire life. We get a lot more background on Feyre and Nesta and Elaine's family, because Feyre was young when they went into poverty, which you learn at the beginning of ACOTAR, whereas Nesta was old enough to understand what was happening. So getting that side of the story, not from the eyes of like a 7-year-old, we get it from the eyes of a teenager, and that's way more different than what we've come to understand as their history. And I love that Sarah J. Maas was able to build upon that history and build upon Nesta's character. This has one of the best character growth arcs I have ever read. And while yes, Nesta is still not my favorite character within the series, I think that she is on a really good path to healing and finding happiness within herself and her life. The next one I have for February is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I've been in love with V.E. Schwab's writing since A Darker Shade of Magic. I've loved that series. I really want to reread it this year, but when I saw that she was coming out with a new book, I got my hands on it, and I ended up not being able to read it till 2021, even though I think this book came out in 2020. In The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, we are following Addie, who is being forced into an arranged marriage in, I believe it's 1700s France. She runs away, and in the middle of the night, she makes a deal with the devil so that she doesn't have to get married. Now, this deal essentially is whenever Addie leaves the vision of someone she's met, they immediately forget her existence, but she is immortal. So we flash between different time periods of Addie's life from the 1700s to current day. While we're in current day, we meet Henry, who is the first person ever to remember Addie. And we follow Henry and Addie as she's trying to tell him her story so that someone will remember her. We also see different impacts in history that Addie has actually had. While people may forget her as a person, a lot of people have not forgotten things that she's done, or she's done things anonymously, and you see that impact. And watching Henry put together some of the dots, seeing myself kind of put together the dots were fantastic. I loved this book. It made me sob, and it was beautifully written and just a literary masterpiece. One of my favorite written books I've ever read. For March, I have Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. This is a spin-off series of her Kiss of Deception trilogy, which is an amazing trilogy, and I would highly, highly recommend them. Definitely read the trilogy before you jump into the duology, as the whole trilogy will be spoiled. But this duology does stand really well on its own, and I loved it. This is an enemies to lovers, forced proximity. It was just a fantastic story filled with adventure. The banter, I think, was the best part of this entire book. The banter and relationships between characters, I think, was the best part of this entire book. I think Mary E. Pearson has a perfect niche of building up character relations. She did the exact same thing in Kiss of Deception, and it only got better within this duology. I fell in love with the characters. I could read their grocery lists and be entertained just because I want to know more about what is going on with these two characters, and even the characters from A Kiss of Deception. I loved seeing their little cameos within the story and how everything fit together in the end. And while this is a post-trilogy story, there wasn't a lack of action and adventure, and even lore. We're going into a completely unknown area of the world within this story, so it's unknown to us, which means more lore, and I love lore. So I love this book, and I love this duology, one of the best duologies I've ever read. For April, I have The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This is such a unique book. We're following this social worker, essentially, but in this world, he is a social worker for specially gifted children, and that's just magical children, magical little orphans, and he goes to these orphanages to make sure that there's proper accommodations for whatever their powers are, and he is assigned to this orphanage in the Cerulean Sea. And he is assigned there because the child there is the child of Lucifer. And he's going to make sure that everything is running smoothly. And this whole story is so wholesome and so beautiful. Again, the last 100 pages, I was sobbing. It was so poignant, and the characters, the children were so adorable. The relationships that our main character was able to build with the children and then with the adult was so magnificent and beautiful to watch. I did end up getting TJ Klune's newest release, Under the Whispering Wood Door. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I am super excited to jump into it if it's anything like this book. Up next, I have Blood Heir by Amelia Zhao. This book took me by such surprise. I went into this really hesitant because there was a lot of controversy before this book was released. It ended up getting its publication pushed simply because apparently there were some issues with some of the beta readers or some of the ARC readers. There was a lot of hate towards the author, so she reworked the story and released it about a year later. And I remember watching through the entire drama, and I knew I wanted to pick this book up. I'm not someone who reads ARCs, so I was never able to have that opportunity to read this as an ARC. But once it dropped, I knew I had to get a copy of this, and I'm in love with it. I don't know what changed, if anything changed, but it was an amazing story. I love our main character. It is very Anastasia-esque, but our princess, whose name is Anastasia, and that might be why I keep thinking of it, and she's accused of murdering her father by being a witch. And she does have blood magic, hence the Blood Heir. And she is on this mission to find the actual murderer of her father and see her brother on the throne. And what I love about this book is our main character is not afraid of her magic. A lot of these YA heroine stories, when they get magic or exiled due to magic, they end up resenting it and have no control over it. And just, they hate using the magic. Whereas our main character, it almost has a villainish outlook on her magic. She's like, no, this is my magic, and I'm great at it. And she is. And even with that, she's still learning how to manipulate and control the blood magic. But she is not afraid of herself or her magic. And I thought that was a welcome breath of fresh air within the story. And all the characters are really fun. We have this jester-like character who I love. We have Ramson, who has his own story. I loved reading Red Tigress. I'm so excited for Crimson Reign. I need to know how this story ends. I'm probably going to end up rereading these 2 books in anticipation for Crimson Reign, just because I want to jump back into this bloody magical world. Next, I have Blade of Secrets by Tricia Levenseller. Now, I'm pretty sure a Tricia Levenseller book has made my top list every year for the past 3 years. So there's no surprise that her newest book is also on this list. Blade of Secrets, we are following a master blacksmith who is commissioned to make a magical weapon, and in doing so, she accidentally makes this almost mind read, truth teller kind of weapon. And she realizes when she's about to give the commissioned item to the person that they're going to use this weapon to take over her country. So she makes some excuse and runs off with her sister and accidentally has to run with a couple other people. There's this whole group, and I love a good group dynamic, and this one has a fantastic group dynamic. But where it really shines is the sister relationships and our main character. Our main character has such bad social anxiety. It was really interesting to see that within a fantasy setting, and I think that Tricia Levenseller did a fantastic job of portraying it. And I just couldn't get enough. The character dynamics are fantastic. The relationships are fantastic. The setting was really cool. And of course, the magical weapons were really cool. Seeing her be very proud and successful within her craft was just magical to watch, because you really saw that anxiety drift off of her shoulders when she would talk about her work and things related to it. So it was phenomenally done, and I would highly recommend this book. I mean, realistically, I recommend literally all of these books. The next one that I have is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I read Circe years ago when it came out, and Book Talk introduced me to Madeline Miller's other book, which came out before Circe. I had no idea it existed. This is following the story of Achilles throughout his entire life, not just during the Trojan War. And what I like about this, it's not in the point of view of Achilles. We are in the point of view of Patroclus, who throughout different history books, he's viewed as Achilles' cousin, brother, friend. In this one, he is Achilles' lover. And I find that to be a very cool dynamic to follow. Again, this book made me sob, and it was just so beautiful to see the point of view from from a person who has always been a side character, and just seeing that their perspective of a perceived hero was so unique. It was such a unique perspective to have within a story, especially ultimately this is a love story, and seeing, Patroclus have to say goodbye to Achilles as he goes off to war, seeing all of that was just so heart-wrenching and heartbreaking. And then, of course, you have the actual Trojan War, because they fought in other wars before that, and watching everything accumulate to the climax of this story, it was beautiful, and I loved every second of this. Up next, I have Defy the Night by Brigid Kemmerer. This book took me by surprise. This wasn't necessarily on my radar. It kind of was, But we ended up going to meet Brigid Kemmerer at an event that was held near where we live. It was one of the launch events for Defy the Night. Now, I've read her Cursebreaker series, which I absolutely adore. I haven't finished it, but we're not going to talk about it. And I've read several other books by Brigid Kemmerer. She started off in contemporary and then went into the YA fantasy. And I think that her YA fantasy and her contemporary are fantastic. And I know it's hard for a lot of authors to be able to pull off both. She pulls off both. Defy the Night was so good. This was like, oh my goodness. It was almost like a female Robin Hood, but instead of, well, yes, she was stealing money, she was also stealing medicine, because in this world there is this huge pandemic. And the cure, which is this flower, which only grows in one section of the country, is being hoarded by the rich. So she's almost stealing money and this cure so that she can help the less fortunate with this disease. And it is beautiful to watch. There are so many cool dynamics. There's a really interesting political system within this, because we also get the prince's perspective. And this prince, his brother, who I think they're only like at most 2 to 4 years apart in age, his brother is the king. So it's not like this old surly king. It's a younger king who is trying to navigate ethical dilemmas such as this pandemic. And watching that politically was so interesting and very reminiscent of today's climate. And I love that she was able to pull that off. And this book came out this year. So she probably wrote the first draft of this before the pandemic even started. So kudos to her for catching that pretty spot on. And overall, fantastic story, fantastic world building. And the medicinal and apothecary aspects were also just top notch. And I need the second book to this. I need it. Gearing away from fantasy, which I think realistically I only have like two-ish books, unless you want to count The Song of Achilles is not a fantasy book. It's more of historical fiction. I have It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. This was my introduction to Colleen Hoover, and I went into this thinking it was a romance. Don't make my mistake. This is a beautiful story. It has romantic aspects, but we are realistically following this woman who is trying to open a flower shop and also just kind of dealing with life in general. And this deals with a lot of really heavy themes, such as domestic violence, sexual assault. I would highly recommend looking at the trigger warnings for this book. What I loved about this is we go back and forth in Lily's life. We go from her present as well as into her past, where she had a romantic relationship with a homeless boy who was squatting in the abandoned home that was next door to her. And you see the almost mirror-ish relationships on how she dealt with things in her teenage years as well as in her adult years. And you follow her adult years for, I think, about 5 years, I believe. And you just follow her and you understand why she makes the decisions that she makes. And they're not always the right ones. There were several times where I was yelling at her that her choices were dumb. But you understand where she's coming from the more you learn about her past. And then what ends up happening is she ends up running into the homeless boy, Atlas, in her present life, and she has to kind of deal with it because she's already in a relationship, and she has to try and navigate her new relationship while also coming to terms with her feelings that she had for Atlas. This was a beautiful story. I fell in love with it. Another book that made me cry. And this is what made me fall in love with Colleen Hoover. I've read a couple of her other books since then, and I've just been collecting her books because she knows how to write heart-wrenching stories. Sometimes we all just need a good cry. I don't know why, but we do. I don't know. Up next is The Prison Healer by Lynette Noni. I've been talking nonstop about this book because I'm obsessed with it. We're following this girl, Kiva, who is the prison healer in a prison that she has been in since the age of 7. And we're following her when she's about 18, 19. In one carriage, the rebel queen and a couple of other random guy prisoners have shown up. And she has tasked to reviving the rebel queen so that she can partake in the trials. But since the rebel queen cannot take part in the trials, Kiva is tasked to take them on her own, and there are these magical elemental trials, and she ends up befriending, she has this little boy who is also in the jail with her, who is her friend, and one of the newer inmates befriends her and starts to help her. And I loved this book. It was so good. We're in this forced setting of a prison the entire book, and it's just so interesting how that changes so many different dynamics and how that facilitates different conversations and dialogues within different types of characters. It's phenomenal. I will not stop talking about this book because I love it so much. Next, I have The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. This is a historical fiction story where we are in the 1800s as well as present day. We are following this apothecary in the 1800s, which its sole purpose was to help women murder their abusive husbands. And we're in present day where this woman has basically gone on her anniversary trip without her husband because she found out he was cheating on her. And she ends up finding this link to this apothecary and goes on this just almost scavenger hunt from the 1800s. And we flip back and forth between the two perspectives while the apothecary was still in business and in present day. And I think that I was a little hesitant at first to get excited about that prospect, because when you flip back and forth between that wide of a range of time periods, it's hard to fall into step with the writing and with the atmosphere that that time period can bring with it. This did it flawlessly. I was never bored. I never favored one time period over another. And this is not a very long book. It's just so fantastic. Well written. It's funny. And I got a lot of enjoyment out of something I would have never really picked up for myself. This was one of Sarah's picks for me. And I am so glad that I agreed and picked this one up. Next, I have Circle of Shadows by Evelyn Skye. I love this book. This book is following this group of assassins in training, essentially. They're at this assassin-y school, and this old war starts to resurface, and they have to navigate their world. They've never really known war, they've heard about it, and you're following these students as they try and understand their magic, their kingdom, their history, while all of these horrible things are being thrown at them. And the characters are phenomenally written, and the world building is beautiful and gorgeous. I loved every second of this book. It was vibrant, atmospheric, and just a wild ride. There was so many really cool action-packed scenes, so much drama, and it was a great story. And I loved it. There's not a single thing about this that I can pinpoint as, yes, that's why I liked it. That's kind of the case for a lot of these. I can kind of pinpoint some things, but with this, it was overall fantastic. Up next, I have The Kingdom by Jess Rothenberg. This book has flown under the radar, and I don't know why more people aren't talking about it, because this book was fantastic. We're following this essentially Disney World android princess as she starts to question everything. It's all the way I was texting Sarah about this book as I was reading it. It's if Disney World met Five Nights at Freddy's. And I am low-key obsessed with Five Nights at Freddy's, so this was exactly my cup of tea. And I read this right around when Security Breach dropped, so that was perfect. But we're following the present day and a little bit into the future of where this animatronic has been accused of murder. And we're following her story as she starts to actually question her programming. She starts to question the people who programmed her life, her purpose, and you start to see her humanize. And then you get these transcripts of the murder trial, which is so interesting because for a while you're not sure who's dead, and it's so well written. I loved every second of it. It was just super fun as a sci-fi novel, as a fantasy novel. Everything worked really well. This is only a standalone as well, and it worked flawlessly. I loved the entire story, the setting of our little Disney World area. I think it was just called the Kingdom was the place that they were, but it was essentially Disney World. And seeing the almost background of how the park worked, how everything just worked, everything that needs to happen on the inside for it to be flawless on the outside. And I think that the author captured that phenomenally. The final book that I have for my favorites of 2021 is Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This is her newest book that came out. This is following this fairy tale of she has been cursed along with her brothers. Her brothers have been changed into these cranes, and if she utters a single word, one of her brothers will die. So throughout most of the book, she does not speak. Think Little Mermaid movie, where she speaks in the beginning and then can't talk most of it. But you don't feel like you're missing anything from her speech. She is very animated, and she is very good at communicating what she wants and how she feels. And I think that's a testament to Elizabeth Lim's writing. It was beautiful. The world is gorgeous, and everything about this story was whimsical and beautiful, and just, I loved every second of this book. It was fantastic. I fell in love with Elizabeth Lim's writing when she wrote Spin the Dawn, which apparently those two worlds are connected, so really happy about that. And she just is an amazing writer. She builds these fairy tales where you feel like you're just reading a fairy tale, but from the hero's perspective, and it's a great way, it's a great immersion, and I am so excited to see where this series goes. I think this is another duology, but it's got magic, it has dragons, it has forbidden romance, it has a Little Mermaid allegory, like, it's all things I love. So those are the 15 books that I adored in the year 2021. I'm still going through a lot of my finalization with my stats and everything, so I'll probably be uploading that video sometime at the end of January. But that's all that I have for you guys today. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, with the occasional Sunday, and I will see you guys in our next video. Bye!